All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm the moderator. I'm Leslie Penelope. I write as L Penelope, and I write fantasy and paranormal romance. Earthsinger Chronicles is my series, and the last one comes out in August, Requiem of Silence. I'm going to have everybody else on the panel introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll get into it. So let's start. I'll just go on my screen. Let's start with Nicole.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Gibbons-Carrickson, the owner of Mocha Memoirs Press. We are a small press out of South Carolina whose mission is to amplify marginalized voices in speculative fiction that includes science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I am also a writer in my own right, so I also write science fiction mysteries, weird westerns, and kind of pulp futurist noir stories. And I'm really excited about this panel.
Awesome. And Michael.
Hey everybody, I'm Michael R. Underwood, he, him. I'm an author, I'm a podcaster. My probably most popular series is Genre Knots, which is a dimension hopping series of adventure novellas. And my latest book is Annihilation Aria. I'm also the co-host of Speculate, a actual play podcast, along with Brandon O'Brien and Gregory A. Wilson. And I've been a Marvel fan of various stripes since I was like 7, getting the deposits back for bottles to go to my comic shop. So that's me.
Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Fan. I'm a sci-fi fantasy author, mostly of books for young adults, including Stronger Than a Bronze Dragon, which is a steampunk fantasy, and the Star Slip series, which is sci-fi. I just completed that series, so pretty proud of that. I'm also the co-editor of the Brave New Girls anthologies about girls in STEM.
Cool. And Devin.
Hi, my name is Devin Randall. I am a Philadelphia-based playwright. In addition, I am a writer for multiple websites, Insig Magazine, Men's Variety, usually LGBT-focused, sometimes men's issues as well. In addition, I am currently here in Key West, Florida as an artist resident with the studios of Key West to work on my first book idea, which, look out for that in a year or two. It's exciting stuff. Thank you for having me.
Yay, that sounds awesome. I wish I was in Florida. So the first question I wanted to ask y'all is your initial impressions of the show, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Initial impressions, and did they change by the finale? Anyone want to start? Devin?
Initial impressions. I think I was first amazed by the styling of the show. Everything from the cinematography being so clean and crisp, to the writing being so authentically Southern and Black in some spaces, especially, of course, the scenes with Falcon and his family. It felt so cinematic, and yet in a short and very, I guess, condensed format. That really kind of got me into enjoying it as definitely a different vibe than what we had just initially gotten from WandaVision. And that did not change throughout the entire show. It just kept on getting better.
Cool.
I mean, I'll admit I loved WandaVision. So I wasn't really excited about the Falcon and Winter Soldier because from the trailers, it seemed to be like a buddy cop film. And I was like, really? Come on, this is Marvel's version of the buddy cop, and it's an African-American male and a white male. It just seemed like very 80s buddy cop theme. So I wasn't looking forward. So I was like, oh, right. And I'm not impressed with Anthony Mackie as an actor before this. I did not think, and it's probably because in the MCU, his Falcon character just hasn't been really developed it developed well. And so he didn't have a focus. And so I was like, oh God, I don't want to watch this, but I'm going to watch it because it's Marvel. I mean, I did watch Ant-Man, so of course I'm going to give this a go. So I watched it, and by the end of it, I loved it. And I really was like, wow. And I agree with Devin, cinematography, tight writing. You only had 6 episodes, and they packed a lot in there. So of course, when you have that, there's going to be places where things don't get quite filled out like you want. But it was still really nice pacing. I'm Southern, and I'm Black. And so there's a lot of the story that spoke to me about family, about origins, about responsibility, especially Isaiah. I'm sure we're going to talk about Isaiah Bradley as a character. So I'm going to hold off on that. But by the end of it, I loved it.
I will say I adored the first episode. Falcon and Winter Soldier were two characters I've liked since the Winter Soldier, like whatever year that was, a gazillion years ago. And I always thought they were both kind of underused. So I was excited to see a show that centered on them. And I loved the first episode because it was all about their characters, how their personalities had been impacted by everything that had happened and their backstories. And then we kind of got into some kind of Marvel mush thriller plot, and I was not thrilled by the middle episodes. I got really confused. Part of it might just be that I'm not familiar with this storyline from the comics, if it's adapted from the comics at all, or any of the comic references. I was just like, what is going on? Why are these the bad guys? They seem like the good guys. What's even happening? But I thought it redeemed itself in the end. I love the finale. So it kind of went in a U shape for me. And I'm like, you know what? Overall, I'll take that muddled middle for that awesome ending.
Yeah, I think for me, I was really taken in by the first episode because there was so much downtime and slice of life where I felt like I got to know Sam and Bucky as people way more, kind of building on what other folks were saying. And I would have been happy with a whole show that was like 60% slice of life, 30% like globetrotting adventure, and 10% whatever else. It moves toward like A plots, B plots, and things like that. And I think there's some good stuff there. But I was kind of sad to not get quite as much slice of life element. And I think that comes back toward the end in some of the kind of character relationship stuff that we get in the last episode. That was nice to kind of come back around to.
Yeah, for me, I was underwhelmed at the beginning. It took me a couple episodes to get into it. I wanted to watch it. The Winter Soldier is one of my favorite MCU movies, and I've seen all of them. And I liked those characters. I also was never a fan of Anthony Mackie as an actor, honestly. Like, I feel like he's cast so much. And I'd love to see other people get roles too, but like, that's neither here nor there. So yeah, the tone for me was a problem. It was very uneven tone. You have the buddy cop thing, and okay, that's a thing. And then there's all these other things happening. And we can talk about like how many issues and storylines this 6-episode show tried to take on, and whether that was a good idea or whether they were biting off a little more than they could chew. But towards the middle, once I kind of settled into it, I started liking it more and more. And then by the end, I think it really culminated. I thought it was very ambitious and, trying to tackle all of these things, all of these various plot lines and kind of weighty subject matter, especially Black issues, but mental health issues with soldiers and kind of all of these things. So yeah, it was my curve was like up kind of, as opposed to like more of a bell curve. So let's see, who has read comic books? Who is a comic book fan, a Marvel comic book fan? Okay, yeah, I'm not coming from the comic books. Is there anything here that from comic books that you saw or that you wished you would have seen?
So like sorry, go ahead, Devin.
Well, my comment is very quick because I'm not much of a comic book reader, other than like I like to know what's happening in comics, but I don't read them as much. Blasphemy, I know. But what I do know is that there is a line said, I think by Isaiah, who says that America's not ready for a Black Captain America. And that's actually a line taken from the comics where, I'm sorry if you hear a little bit of a plane, there's only one airport in Key West, and they fly right over where I am. But anyway, Isaiah says America isn't ready for a Black Captain America, and that's actually a line from the comics around the time when Sam Wilson became Captain America. And I was amazed that not only did they keep that line, but who they had say it. And that's a lot.
Yeah, so like the Flag Smasher is a character. Like there's two or three different people who have been Flag Smasher in the comics. The show's version of Flag Smashers are fairly distinct in some notable ways. And then US Agent, like it exists in the comics. I think the storyline of like that relationship between him and like the legacy of Steve is different. But yeah, we have a few kind of pieces that are getting recontextualized in the MCU here.
And then, so WandaVision was I guess the first TV show that they were doing. And, I really enjoyed WandaVision. It dealt with, mental health, depression, and also the aftermath of the snap, the blip, whatever they will call it. How do you feel that that this show dealt with the aftermath of that, of the end game and the Thanos situation.
So in WandaVision, we got to see how it affected Wanda. But in the Falcon and Winter Soldier, we got to see how it affected normal everyday people in terms of borders, in terms of resources, in terms of suddenly I've gotten married because my wife left, Blip was snapped out of existence, and now she's back, and it's been a blink of an eye for her, but it's been 5 years for me. So we got to see lots of human non-superhero stuff and how it affected the world. And I think that was really eye-opening, and I thought that was really useful because we got to see it on the individual level at Wanda, then we get to see it on a much more broader level with Flag Smashers and with other individuals in the Falcon and Winter Soldier, and how it affected like Sam. He goes back to his sister and she's like, you were gone and I had to do this. And he's like, so there's a lot of, I thought they did it really well in terms of showing the broader aspects of the impact of the blip.
I like that they really did make that a focus of the show. I was a little worried that they were going to do the whole like, oh, well, we defeated the bad guy, so we put everything back to normal thing that, sometimes series do. Mm-hmm. And I like that they actually did progress it. That said, I do think the show was a little rushed. I think some of the stuff in the middle that I thought of as just like Marvel mush could have been a lot more powerful if we'd had, maybe a whole 22 episode season or something, just because it is such a big world and there is so much going on that I feel like it needed a little more space.
Yeah, I would agree on that. The commentary, I think on both of what you both said, I believe the commentary was interesting, especially with Sarah, how she was like, you were gone, I was here. I specifically love the line, though I'm gonna mess up the rephrasing of it. I put in $2 and I'm making $1, something to that extent of like the effort and the work that she put in order to get just everything stable while half of the world was gone. And while the Flag Smashers were really this kind of result of the blip, it did not fully go into the actual effects of what it was like for these people who were not just people who had disappeared and come back, but also people who had just realized that half of the world was gone, and what does that leave me with? The emotional side of that, it was more factual and then moving on.
And I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry. I'm like reading the chat and then my mind is wandering. But okay. Oh no, it's Flag Smashers. And then the GRC, like it never really established what exactly they were doing. Like I understood the Flag Smashers were upset about things, but it was very vague as to what specifically, like where were they being moved to and from, and what specifically the GRC is doing. And so not understanding like what the villains in that way for the Flag Smashers that are villains to are responding to made it difficult for me to connect with them or follow the storyline. That was one of the things.
I thought they were, for my viewing, and I could totally have missed it too, I thought they were upset about how, and the GRC's focus is putting everything back, like Mary said, the way that it was. Mm-hmm. And the Flag Smashers were like, that's their whole one world. We've existed as a unit, and now you're trying to reestablish and redisperse people, and you're not giving out supplies like you said you were. You're not, it looked a lot like the world was one big refugee camp, and the GRC was coming in to try to reestablish some sort of pre-existing order in terms of borders and supplies, and you actually need to be over in this country and you need to be in that country. And the Flag Smashers like, for the last 5 years, we've been one world. And why can't we just move forward with that instead of trying to go back to the way that it was before? In many ways, it parallels our conversations about the pandemic. Why do we want to go back to the way things were when they weren't great then, when we have this working way of a unit now? Why can't we just move forward with that? And so that's what I got for it, but I could have been reading way more into the storyline than was actually there.
Yeah, like watching the first episode, I felt like I had a pretty decent sense of like what was up with the GRC and the Flag Smashers. And then it got muddled. Like, okay, the various factions' actions are getting muddled, and like who is and isn't accountable here. It's like, was there official relaxation of borders? Was there official migration for work, where they talk about people who, you went somewhere because they needed some people to do X, Y, or Z. And that lack of clarity made for me responding to that kind of the political axis of antagonism and conflict really hard to do, because the stakes weren't clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of my issues also. So you mentioned sort of the forces of antagonism. There are lots, and for a show this short, lots of levels of antagonism. The Flag Smashers, Zemo, the Power Broker, and then you bring in the new Captain America. There's a lot happening. So how do you feel that the show dealt with the forces of antagonism? And Michael, you raised the point of them like critiquing or demonizing characters who critique the status quo. And it seems kind of like, all the villains are doing that in a certain way.
Yeah, I think this is something that's been talked about pretty widely, so it's not like a super singular thought for me. It's just that, we see characters like Voltron, Ultron, and Whiplash all present different critiques of Marvel heroes, largely Iron Man in this case, where Vulture's like, well, he's got the government in his pocket, and Whiplash is angry about the Starks stealing his parents' like technology and science, and that there are a number of these characters who structurally are these dark mirrors or like villainous mirrors of existing characters, which is fairly traditional storytelling. But I find that in the MCU, a lot of their critiques are accurate, but then the characters are demonized by going too far. Like, oh, they had a good point, but then they went too far. And that allows the storytellers to kind of push aside some of those critiques without having to fully account for them. And I felt like there was a really egregious version of that in how Carly and the Flag Smashers' critique of the GRC and kind of the global world order was handled in the show.
Just want to agree, because I remember there's one moment that really seemed to come out of nowhere, and that's when Carly bombed that one location with people still inside, and just seemed like just didn't seem to care that there were people being blown up, which came out of left field. I was like, wait, she's like been kind of the good guy in a way, like she's been like this Robin Hood figure, and then suddenly she's killing people. Even her followers are like, Carly, what the heck? And it just seemed to come out of nowhere, and it kind of felt like somebody in the writer's room was like, don't forget, she's the bad guy. We have to make her do something bad right now. Otherwise, people are going to forget. So let's kill off some random people. And now she's a bad guy.
I think the real problem with all of this was that there were too many wants and desires going on, both in the script and outside of the script. As a writer, one thing that I think is like the basis, I've said this in another panel, so Mary will hear this again, but as the basis of writing is, what does the character want? What are the desires behind the character? Because if you know what the character wants, you'll know how they will act in any given circumstance. But that specific scene with the bombing, something just dropped. The specific scene with the bombing was, felt more like the creator, the writers, or maybe even Disney executives, Marvel executives, whomever, were forcing this situation to happen in order to fill some kind of narrative. But then conversely, later on, we have the scene with Agent, with him striking and getting the shield bloody, and the whole visual of that beautiful and so full of context, but so contradictory to what's been said in this grand scheme before that. I swear there's like a plane every few seconds. But anyway, beyond that, it felt more like both having characters and their wants conflict. That's what creates drama. That's perfect. That's good writing, or the basis, the start of good writing. But having a writer's desire on on a story can affect it in a negative light. And then on top of that, we've all seen it before, where executives kind of get in the way and put their desires into a story. So I feel like that is the direct cause and problem behind all this stuff that we talked about, is that there are just too many desires going into this story.
Kind of wonder if one of the challenges that these Marvel movies and shows are starting to have is that the whole thing is so meticulously plotted out. I mean, it's an enormous, sprawling universe, and as a writer, just thinking about writing part of it is like kind of intimidating. And I think the only way they managed to make it work and have all like the continuities make sense is that they meticulously plot it. But when you do that, there's no room for like, you know, a little bit of improvisation where you need it. Like maybe you plot it like one way, and then as you're writing it, you're like, oh, maybe this other way would make more sense. But because it's like, well, the bosses have already said this has to happen by the end so that the next movie makes sense, you don't have that room to do something else.
Yeah, it did feel manipulative and forced. And some of the, you know, there were parts of it along the way where it felt like we have to get here. We don't have enough time, so we'll get here. And if it makes sense, if it doesn't make sense, we're moving that in that direction. And then, yeah, in the comments, Aaron mentioned something about nationalism. And I thought that was interesting in the scene when the Dora Milaje show up and talk about jurisdiction. And I was like, well, does Captain America have jurisdiction in whatever country they're in right now? So, you know, that sort of thing, the nationalism, there's so many themes, you know, globalism versus nationalism and all of that mixed in, and you kind of just slip it in a little bit and go back to all of the other themes that you're dealing with. So it's ultimately a superhero story, but it's trying to be more grounded. And I think that one of the things these TV shows are trying to be more grounded. But do you think that like comic book IP and superhero stories should be tackling these sort of social issues like racism and mental health and things like that?
I think so. I think so because one, the MCU will not be able to last if they don't diversify their stories. And I mean that in different ways, you know, in terms of race, of course, but also just in the actual content that they're telling. That makes it more engaging. That said, it is a tightrope because Marvel Disney is this big juggernaut company that's trying to get reach across the world. And that brings complications and that kind of divisiveness in the desires and wants that I talked about earlier. And that's where I think we're seeing some of the faltering that's happening. And I think there will be more faltering to happen, which I'm worried about because Disney's Phase 4 is very much trying to diversify itself in many ways. But I hope at the very least, they can try to be more interested in telling good stories and not just getting the numbers. But it's a company, you know, it's a wibbly wobbly mess.
Like in the comics, they dealt with those issues anyway. So it's not really new for Marvel. They've dealt with diversity, they deal with mental illness, they deal with a lot of stuff in comics too. And so that's kind of things they've done before. So it's not uncommon to see it on the screen. What was weird was when it did not appear on the screen. And we're like, but we talked about this in the comics. So they're all over each other in the comics. So why can't they be all over each other on screen? It's the same characters, right? Or whatever the case may be. And so I think they can do it. I agree with Devin that it is a tightrope, but it goes back to who's in the writer's room, right? Is your writing team as diverse as the characters you're depicting on the screen? If they're not, there will be some missteps. There is going to be some things that don't land correctly because who's in there writing it, right? Who's writing those scripts? So that was the beauty of Black Panther. The whole team from all of it, from writer, directors, staff, right? Costume design, everyone involved were people of color. And so I think if you don't have a diverse writing group for the script, even if it's Marvel, you're going to have some missteps. So who's in the writer's room and who's directing? That matters too.
Very quickly, I just want to add, just because Nicole, it's a great segue from what Nicole just said. The showrunner of the show is a Black man, Malcolm Spellman. And then the director who directed all of the episodes is a white woman. So they have at least made attempts in this show to have that diversity. And I know the writer's room included some white men. So take that as you may.
Yeah, and producers too. Some were Black producers. So we have a question in the chat about Bucky being queer coded since the first Avenger. Did you guys catch the queer references, and do you think Marvel is doing a good job of showing Bucky as queer? Or are they playing it safe by never actually saying it and only just implying it? And honestly, I never saw any queer coding for Bucky. That's news to me, but hey, Devin, take it.
I know exactly what you're talking about because I definitely wrote an article about it. There was a scene in the first episode when he was on the date with the girl, and she was like, well, you know, what has your life been like the blip? And he said that he was on dating apps and he's seeing strange things like tiger pictures. And people on Twitter got into a big frenzy about that because apparently there's a trend of dudes having tiger photos on their Tinder accounts. And so people were like, is this Bucky coming out? Is this a thing? Is it happening? And Malcolm Spellman actually came out with a comment saying like, just watch the show and see, which was a good segue to, good way to say, I'm not going to touch this. So to my knowledge, that's the only kind of reference that got people questioning in this show. And yeah, that's about it.
Anyone else? Because I thought it was interesting they were setting up a relationship with him and Sarah potentially, which is very interesting. Then you have the whole,
yes,
you're dating my sister, or you like my sister kind of thing.
Yes. He could be bisexual also.
Of course, yeah. And so Pilgrims, the first Avenger Bucky is very queer coded. Yeah, then that's interesting because I never picked up on that
either.
Disney's overall like film and TV record with queer rep, and especially in the MCU, has been, I would say, questionable. And there's been several different pieces of like, oh, it's like for, Disney's first gay X, like, oh, there's a gay moment in this Beauty and the Beast remake, and there's like a second and a half of two women kissing in a Star Wars movie that gets cut out for certain parts of the international release. So like, I feel like there's still a lot to be, there's still a lot that's wanting about some of this.
I could also add in some of the queer coding commentary from before this series. If only I could find my article very quickly. But essentially, there was a lot of commentary before the show started that like, is Bucky going to finally get acknowledged? Because one, the relationship between him and Steve has always caused people to see some queer coding in terms of just their closeness, the fact that their relationships were so intense and so focused on each other, even to their storylines being so based off of each other. And then on top of that, they're in the comics. Let me see if I can very quickly pull up this video, this article. But in the comics, there was a character, the one character that Captain America knew that was still alive when he got de-iced, was a gay man. And it's believed that a lot of Bucky in the film's storyline or background was borrowed from that gay man, that he was a former Army veteran, a former veteran with Steve Rogers, that he grew up with Steve and protected Steve from bullies, and that he was gay. That character's name was, if I can, Arnie.
It's in the Arnie Roth. Yeah, it's in the chat. Someone's like, Arnie Roth, who is that? Pilgrim was like, yeah, I know who it is.
A lot of what Bucky's background in the films was taken from Arnie Roth, and that on top of their just general storylines being so focused on each other has led to #give Captain America a boyfriend and lots of commentary about Stucky.
I do feel like that, I see that, like, not seeing it, it's like, I wish that if they were going to do something, they would just do it, because it's very, if queer people have to like read so between the lines in such detail to find queerness in it, they're failing, Marvel is failing. Like, if there's going to be queer characters, it's kind of like that thing where, oh, so-and-so was Black, I just didn't tell you, like in a book, like someone else did that. In
J.K. Rowling's always doing it with Harry Potter characters.
Right. Like, what, that doesn't count if we don't know that they're Black or if they're gay, like, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. Yes, queer people always have to read between the lines because, so I just feel like it's a failure on their part. If there was any intent, then make it known, and whether or not Disney's going to do that or not, I don't know. But yeah, live out loud, please. So another question in the chat, what about the presence of Eli in the show? And do you think we'll finally get a Young Avengers live action, or should I not hold my breath? I don't remember who Eli is.
Isaiah's grandson.
It's Isaiah's grandson. I want a Young Avengers movie. I do. I really do. I do. I feel like, oh my gosh, we should totally have this. We have so many great actors right now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, just the level of talent that is out there. If you could pull this, it would be brilliant. I want to see that. It would be so brilliant.
Let me not speak over you, sorry, but
No, you're fine.
actually in the works. And we can see it's starting to become a thing because you have WandaVision and the two sons who are in the Young Avengers. And then the very end, you know what? I realize some people might not have seen that, so no more spoilers. Watch WandaVision. In addition to that, we have Cassie Lang, who was aged up at the end or in Endgame. We have Hawkeye, which is coming out, which will, again, no spoilers, but there have been set photos and everything. So we do know that, and she's literally a big part of it. So Kate Bishop is coming for that. In addition, who else can I remember at this current moment? I think those are the only ones. And America Chavez is confirmed to appear in a future film. I, again, don't want to say too much to spoil anyone, but Young Avengers are on the way. It's just a question of how long will it take for them to show up. And they have cast actually not Captain America, Miss America. They cast the actress and she is young. She's like 13, 14. So they're clearly trying to like wait to give her time to age up. And so in the works, but probably not for several more years.
Another question about US Agent. Any thoughts on the soft redemption arc for US Agent? I feel like there was a lot of chatter about that they set him up to obviously be a villain, and then they sort of let him off the hook a bit. They pulled the punch with that, in my opinion. What do you guys think about old Captain America and the US Agent?
I agree. I feel like he was kind of a missed opportunity because when he first came out, looking all blonde hair and blue-eyed and carrying that shield, like, it was his right. I thought he was going to be a commentary on, some of the white nationalism we've been seeing in the real world. And I thought that could have been really clever, show how, the old Captain America sort of version of patriotism has been twisted by modern times. But I do feel like they pulled their punch and they were just like, we're going to have one villainy moment and then he gets a redemption arc for no reason.
Yeah, there's also some just diegesis questions about how much damage various super soldier characters can take and how much that maybe feels like the writer or somebody else putting their thumb on the scale about stuff in terms of who gets to live to spin off versus who gets basically used up as a person by an individual narrative. I think I'd be very interested to see Nuke as a character from the comics show up alongside either US Agent or in some future Captain America stuff, because I think Nuke is a character who is more in the comics closely lined up with that question of militant white nationalist ideology from the comic side. So maybe we'll get some of that. I don't know.
Wasn't US Agent in the comics more of a white nationalist kind of?
I thought he was.
Maybe more than this one, but from my recollection is that Nuke is the one who visually and otherwise is more coded as tier 1 operator, vigilante, 3%er type guy.
So the partner for US Agent was
Battlestar.
I feel like they wasted an opportunity there. I don't think that was even, that was the one thing that bothered me. Really, you have a sacrificial why? I don't even think you needed that. You just didn't need that, right? I think they missed an opportunity there as well. You didn't need Battlestar there, right? You just didn't need that. It was almost like the Agent Coulson thing in Avengers. You have to have some sacrifice to get the character to level up. This isn't an anime. this is the Avengers, right? Or this is Marvel.
And then to take him there and then not go all the way with that. And then to kind of he's back in the fold, sort of.
No, I agree. I think they definitely pulled their punch with it. I think they missed an opportunity. I strongly believe there were too many cooks in that kitchen. There were too many, what was the point of Power Broker? You didn't need that angle. You could have just talked about how they stole it from Power Broker. You didn't really need to see that character appear at all. I think they had a lot of, I know that with WandaVision, I felt like they didn't stick the landing. And that was because of the pandemic. They had originally planned, and this is what Mary was talking about earlier, they're so meticulously planned. They had planned for 13 episodes for that, and they end up not being able to tape all 13 because of the pandemic. And so it got switched to the 9. And that's why that last episode feels so disjointed. And so I think that happened with the Falcon and Winter Soldier as well. It might have been planned for 12 episodes or 13 or maybe 9, and they just didn't get there because of the pandemic. And so they just kind of condensed what they had, which is why it feels like everything is so choppy and there's missed threads, and it's just kind of convoluted, that murky middle that Mary and Leslie, you guys were talking about. I think that's why. It's because they just didn't get to, because they had planned so meticulously, they weren't expecting the global pandemic, right? And so it kind of ruined their ability to put it all, to bring it all to fruition.
I thought the Power Broker was a real miss. I mean, I don't think anybody was surprised, and it just felt like the character arc didn't make any sense, even though they were trying to like wedge it in there for Sharon. I didn't buy it for her at all, and they didn't make us buy it. So yeah, Devin, you're gonna say
I was
something?
mad. I feel like they spit on Agent Carter's legacy. That made me really upset. I was like, are you serious? And I agree that Sharon has always been a very, spoiler, that character has always been very level-headed, very much, I felt she was always very level-headed in her decision-making, even under fire. And to just see her just make, you know what I mean? To go from this place to this type of personality to that type of personality because of what happened in the blip, just seemed very, I need more background and justification for that. Right.
I actually have the opposite reaction, but I think that's mostly because I don't read the comics, and so I don't know the agent in the comics. See, I don't even know her actual number, 13, I think. So that's how much I don't know her in the comics. And also her character was largely underwritten in the movies. So with that, what I know of her is that, okay, she's an agent. She seems to be a good guy, but she's been spurned by the government, and she's like, you know what, I'm going to get mine. And I really respected that storyline, or that perspective of like, you know what, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to take care of myself. And if that's seen as negative or evil, it is what it is. And I'm like, okay, I support that. That's from my perspective. But in addition to that, I think what also hinders her storyline and all these other characters we're talking about is the fact that Marvel seems to be afraid to have villains. Part of that might be because, you know, they often end up killing off their villains, and they don't have any long-standing villains in their stories. But they seem to have been gravitating more towards anti-heroes. So we have, you know, Agent, we have Sharon, we have
even Killmonger, I think, would be an anti-hero.
Yeah. I was thinking of him as well, but even Zemo was getting lots of praise, right? And I'm like, you guys do remember that he's a very awful person, right?
Yeah.
But every villain is a hero in his own book, right? Or in her own book. So I think too, they do, like Devin said, they do kind of walk that line between, even, and you saw it with Killmonger particularly, I am a good person. I have a good reason for the way that I am. Right? I have a good reason for the way that I am, and it makes sense. And even Zemo's, you can't have these superpower people doing things because you can't control them.
Right.
They act like gods, but they're not. I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, it's like, but Zemo's also like a landed baron. And so like
yes.
Aristocratic power and wealth is fine.
Fine.
For him,
yes.
Right?
Makes perfect sense. I wanted to make sure we talked about Isaiah Bradley and how the show deals with that whole storyline. It connects, you know, it's very like a spine of it in terms of Sam's storyline. So I don't really have a question. What do you think about Isaiah?
I think Isaiah was done very well. I think though I wish I could have seen more of like flashbacks possibly to his storyline. Like if Nicole was correct that we should have had more episodes, I would have loved time to actually sit with him and like see his life, see and not just be told about what went down with him. But I think the actor who played him was just absolutely fantastic in what he was given, and that made it so much more compelling. Though in a way he was just used. It's funny because he was used as a tool both for the US government, but also for the story to help Sam get his kind of story going. And that makes him even more of a tragic character.
Yeah, it was super tragic. And it reminds me of the old guard that we talked about last night. Just you have this one character who had this horrible thing happen to them. They're imprisoned, not thousands of years, but decades, and spur the other characters into action. And show a mirror, hold up a mirror to Sam and the different. I appreciated that there were different ways to approach Blackness and sort of the trauma of being Black in America, and it had different perspectives for different characters, and that they exhibited that.
I think that what I really liked about Isaiah and Sam's character, and mostly their discussion, it kind of mirrors the discussion between the civil rights generation and the generation that came after. And so this conversation piece about, we know the horrors of what has happened to us, and then that generation that was still dealing with anti-Blackness and still dealing with racism, but not to the degree that the previous generation had. And having those conversations around, so what is our identity now? Who are we now? And so, and trying to find your way. So it's very much the way that you have the conversation with T'Challa being a prince in Wakanda, and Killmonger is also a prince of Wakanda, but being expelled from Wakanda, and having those conversations about, what does that mean? What is that impact? And so I feel like we have that same thing between Sam and Isaiah. You have a generation between them. They both are giving this opportunity, but the way it impacts Isaiah and the way that it impacts Sam, both Black men in America, but a generation apart, is very telling in how they approach that, their view of that, and what they do with it when they have it. And the government's use of them, because Sam was working with the Air Force, but he can't get a bank loan.
Right.
So,
and does his job not pay enough? Right.
I'm like, what is so there's a lot of nuanced conversation around that. And I feel like that's the one thing that the Falcon and Winter Soldier, one of the things that they did really well. Sorry, I'm fishy. I really like that part of it. So
that was the part that was personally impactful, and I connected to it a lot, obviously. But yeah, they spent a little more time on it than they did with these other things, because I think because the showrunner is Black, that was something that he probably, I'm assuming, wanted to put to the forefront. So, okay, 10-minute warning. The future of the MCU. How does this show set us up for the future? What are you excited about? I know Devin mentioned, we're setting up for more diversity and representation, and hopefully you won't have to use a magnifying glass to find the queer characters anymore. But yeah, how do you feel it sets it up, and are you excited? What do you think's to come?
You all know I love talking about the future of Marvel. I'm very in depth with it. I'll try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible, though. So it seems that Phase 4 with Marvel is about really expanding the world and diversifying the world of Marvel. And so we have, first off, Captain America 4 has been announced. It is in the works, and the showrunner is coming back to write it. So that's wonderful, and I'm very excited for that. Though I wonder, when will that happen? It's been announced, but no official date, and Phase 4 is already pretty packed and pretty pushed back, so it's a wonder when that'll actually be a thing. But in addition to that, we see that, again, Isaiah Bradley's grandson is in this, and he ends up becoming a Young Avenger, and there are trickling effects of Young Avengers coming up. In terms of LGBT representation, as you just mentioned, The Eternals, a film that's coming out later this year, will have a gay character, and it's confirmed that he will be married and have children, and he will be one of the main cast. Of course, that's a very overloaded film, so I honestly doubt he'll have much to do, but he'll be gay. So it becomes one of those things of like, how are we okay with that kind of representation? It's out and it's open, but also it's probably all that he does. And I think that's my big issue with what's coming up with Marvel Phase 4, and my concern is that it's expanding exponentially very quickly. So many Disney Plus shows, so many films, so much representation, but it might be too bloated, and they might be doing too much too quickly. That will it be able to keep all these balls it's juggling up in the air without dropping?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to agree with that, just because it used to be when a new Marvel movie was announced, I'd get excited. Now I get a little scared because I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to have time to watch all of these, like a gazillion movies plus Disney Plus shows? And I also wonder if it's becoming inaccessible to new fans, because right now, like if you just heard about WandaVision and thought it was an interesting show, you'd have to watch 20 whole movies in order for it to make sense. So yeah, I kind of wonder if there's a way they can, both expand on their current universe the way they're planning to, but also dial a few things back so that, someone who's like, I don't want to watch, movies that came out 10 years ago, I just want to watch the next one, can just go in and start watching. That said, I do like that they are kind of, I feel like, making their universe a bit more complex. I feel like, the phase 1 movies were very like sort of black and white in terms of like who the good guys and bad guys were, and they've been gradually sort of steering into a more complex moral landscape. So that's exciting. But yeah, I just hope they don't make it get too big. I mean, I'm already having trouble keeping up with it all.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see some more experimentation in terms of format and subgenre. So like WandaVision took some interesting, really big swings in not being like kind of the same as a lot of MCU stuff. And like there's the potential in like, is the Loki show like an American Doctor Who? And like, in what ways is that different? And what space is made for creators, and specifically made for marginalized creators, to not have to follow a very specific house style in expanding what the MCU gets to mean?
So I've always liked that Marvel, and I mentioned this before, underneath that big umbrella of the superhero, every incarnation of every Marvel movie is very different. And so like the Falcon, not Winter Soldier, Captain America, Winter Soldier, it's a superhero film, but it's a spy film, right? And Thor is a fantasy. And so, and Ant-Man is a comedy. And so you, even underneath the umbrella of they're all superhero movies, they've all been very different. And so and you can see that with the shows. WandaVision is one thing. It's a spoof on sitcoms that, and Falcon and Winter Soldier is one thing, and Loki will be something else. So I too, like Michael, am very interested to see how many subgenres they play with as they grow out, right? If you look at like Black Panther is as Afrofuturism, right? So you see all these very different subgenres that they're playing with, and I would love to see what they do going forward. They did the Avengers as a buddy movie, and an ensemble cast. So lots of different ways and subgenres. I'd like to see what they do going forward.
Cool. Any last questions or points that you want to make? We have a few minutes left. Anyone had anything else to add?
Sure. I would love to just kind of share what is in the works in terms of like titles, nothing specific other than that. For those who are interested to know and don't know yet. So a few future Disney Plus shows that are in the works are Moon Knight, She-Hulk is getting a show, Miss America is getting a show that's currently in production, I believe, or like nearing the end of production. As you see, more diversity. I believe there is a Wakanda show in the works. No info other than it's being based in Wakanda. That's off the top of my head. Fantastic Four as a film is in the works. Mary, I saw your comment. So far, all we know is that it is based in Wakanda, no specifics. Though it would make a lot of sense to have Okoye there, and Ayo, who of course appeared in this show. And also, fun fact, is a queer character. She is gay. So I would love to see that explored as well. Fantastic Four is in the works. We know that a Blade film has been in the works, but again, that's probably many years in the future. Of course, Guardians is coming back, and a few more here and there that I'm just forgetting off the top of my head. But there's plenty of things in the future, lots of diversity and lots to look forward to, but also probably a little exhaustion. We'll try to take it slow.
Awesome. That's really cool to hear. Okay, thanks everybody. I want everyone to like, where can we find you? Where will you be? What's coming up next for you? Let's start with Devin.
Hi everyone. Once again, my name is Devin Randall. You can find me on all the socials at DevJackRan. I can write that in the comments here. And then wait a year or two and there might be a book in the future. We'll see.
Mary.
Hi, you can find me online at maryfan.com or on Twitter and Instagram at astrocult, and I just put that in the chat. So thanks for coming out.
So, Michael.
Hey everybody, I've been Michael R. Underwood. You can find me on Twitter at Mike R. Underwood. I do actual play podcasts at speculatesf.com, and I'm doing a special charity game tomorrow at 3 p.m. raising funds for the Damon Runyon Cancer Research Foundation, and you can find that at twitch.tv/Arvin Elleron, and I'll put stuff in the chat. Thanks.
And Nicole.
You can find me at mochamemoirspress.com and on Twitter at Nicole G. Kurtz or at Mocha Memoirs. That is all in the chat as well.
And I'm Leslie at lpenelope.com and Leslie Penelope on Twitter and Insta. I have a reading today at 4:30 if anyone is interested. And thank you guys for coming. It was a great discussion. I appreciate all of you panelists and have a great rest of your con. I think
Thanks, Leslie, for moderating. It was great.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, Discord, what is it? The Mount Washington room, if anyone wants to run by and continue chatting. All right. Thanks again and
Everyone.
take care.